This episode of Positively Trek is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon, including Jim Stoffel, Joyce Marin, Carl Morris, and our associate producer, William Smith. Visit patreon.com/positivelytrek to help support the podcast. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, shoutouts, associate producer credits, and more. Thank you all very much for your support, and enjoy the show.
Dear editors, thank you for the confidence you expressed in me by accepting my proposed profile of Dr. Bashir. Unfortunately...
Do you follow?
Sort of.
Good, because that's the key. The protein anomalies. They indicate...
Who cares about anomalies? People want stories about things they can relate to. Life and death, good and evil. An outbreak of Cartalian fever would be just the thing. The brave doctor battles the deadly virus. Listen to me, I'm actually rooting for a plague.
So we're going back 11 years to a novel that was released in 2010, April of 2010, and that is Star Trek Online, The Needs of the Many. And Dan and I are here on Positively Trek. Welcome to all of you joining us here on the show. And we only have one of the authors on to discuss this book, because it's written by Michael A. Martin and Jake Sisko. And Dan, can you guess which author we have on?
Oh, man. We probably could. The temporal accords really prevented us from getting Jake, I'm assuming. Is that right?
Yeah, the gross violation of the temporal prime directive. I'd completely forgotten about that. That there was that was the conceit, was that these were oral histories that Jake Sisko gathered during times of war, and I was just kind of like compiling it and editing it and taking the best bits, whatever would fit in the volume that size.
Yeah, and it's very unusual. So this book, Star Trek Online, The Needs of the Many, you are the author, but you also are a character in the book. So explain to us how this all came about.
Well, I'm only a character in the book in that I'm a name on the spine, really, you know.
But Jake's editor got you to take his interviews and write a book in that time. You're a contemporary historian.
Right. And I never thought of it that way until I noticed Memory Beta. My name is in there as an author and as a character. And I thought, what the hell is this? But then it was because of this book. What we were trying to do was kind of World War Z, sort of, Max Brooks's Chronicle of the Zombie Apocalypse, but apply a format like that to wartime in Star Trek.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, because I definitely got World War Z vibes from this. Was part of a book club and fairly recently read that book, so that was really fresh in my mind for this.
Yeah, that was not terribly subtle template we followed. It really just it all just kind of fell out of me all at once. It was really fast, went really quick. It's just, you get those voices in your head talking, then it's just stenography.
So this book is based on Cryptic Studios' Star Trek Online.
Yeah.
So it
uses their timeline.
Yeah. So is this work? This book is really a complement to the game, I'm assuming. Right?
Yeah. At the time, I was hoping, they're going to do a bunch of this kind of stuff, but it never. This is the one and only book that tied in with their version of the Star Trek universe, at least that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think it is. Mm-hmm. It's the only one.
Yeah, their timeline at the time, I think, incorporated the approach to J.J. Abrams, Sidetrack universe. Yeah, it was just the one and only tie-in with that. But they, one of the first things I remember seeing from them was a timeline with various historical beats on it, and it went out to the early 25th century. And I haven't really kept up with that in years, so I'm not sure where it's gone after that. That would be kind of neat if they would do more of that stuff, but we never did.
So that timeline you're talking about, I'm assuming that's kind of the path to 2409 that's printed in the back of the book here as well. How much input was there on this story that you crafted from the Cryptic Studio guys, or were you kind of given a lot of free rein to kind of decide how those played out in the story?
I just kind of did whatever I wanted. And, as far as, getting editorial guidance, it was really easy to take any chapter of the book. I mean, because each chapter is a separate story, but, leaves together as a sort of an epistolic novel kind of thing. You could reduce each chapter to a kind of just a really quick description. Goran's playing baseball. What do you think? And just go off and do it. So the thing really, it was easy to sketch it out. That nobody was really interfering or giving me a lot of restrictions. I just thought, well, okay, nobody seems to mind the essential events that I'm relating, and so it's just a matter of just kind of filling it in, and like a painting.
Yeah, because if they've sketched out this timeline over the course of 20, 30 years.
Right, you have all these beats that are already there.
Yeah, you're filling in those blanks in a sense.
Yeah, so it felt more like a piece of sculpture, than a piece of linear storytelling. Maybe mostly because the through line was not a single plot. The through line is a theme, the war. And within that, each chapter just has to have a satisfying beginning, middle, and end. So I guess in a way it's an anthology. It's not really a novel, but there's the war as the through line.
Yeah, because the basic premise of the novel is that Jake Sisko, of course, is a writer, and it's the year 2423. And he had conducted interviews with different individuals about this long war, or the Undine War, which is
right.
Species 8472. So we get a name to that. And so then his publisher hires you, the historian, to take his collection of interviews and put a book together called The Needs of the Many. And so what we're holding is that, for lack of a better way to phrase it, is a future fiction book from the timeline. So as you being that author in this book who's putting all these stories together and such, so tell us about the whole, where did the name for Species 8472 come from? Was that from the game, or was that something you came up with?
I honestly don't remember. Where I remember going into it, we had discussed using 8472, and very early in the process, I decided that, or maybe we had all decided that 8472 can only be a placeholder. That's obviously not what they're called. That's not what they call themselves. It's a Borg designation, and they don't even know it. There was some kind of a Greek mythological origin for that, but I hesitate to say I came up with it.
Yeah, I read a little bit about that. I don't remember the character's name, but there's an interview in here with Professor Timothy Palmer, and he says that the name is meant to mean groundskeeper, and that it's to imply that they're stewardship of the fluid space. And so Undine has something to do with water, or I forget. It was something Greek about managing.
That's in the
water.
book?
Yeah.
Jesus.
You should read the book sometime.
I do also like the kind of double play on groundskeepers kind of being the basis of that, because of course one of them appeared as Boothby in Voyager, so that was clever.
Wow, yeah, that was clever. I've completely forgotten about that.
See, you've underestimated yourself.
Yeah, I mean the process for these things is you got to clear out that working memory. Once you hit the send key and it's gone to the copy editor, you're just shaking your head like an Etch-a-Sketch. Get this stuff out. So you can load up for the next project.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's also hard because this book was 11 years ago, which means you wrote it more than 11 years ago, and sometimes we've talked to authors about coming on to older books, and they're like, yeah, if I can remember everything about it, it starts to come to you after a while when we start talking through it.
Yeah, but no, I'm taking your word for it about the origin of the name of the Undine, because that is clever, but I don't remember. This happens to Sir Paul all the time. Stories about the Beatles. Yeah. Well, yeah, if you say so. You know better than I do.
I'm a little curious about how this novel initially came about. So we talked a little bit about there's kind of the hope that it would be a bit of an ongoing series. I'm curious about, like, at the beginnings of that, like, how did you kind of get the assignment to write this novel? Was it something that you were actively kind of looking for, or was that a kind of an editorial coming down to them picking an author?
I remember Ed Schlesinger at Pocket Books. He didn't have a lot of time. I mean, there wasn't a lot of time, but from the time when he knew of this thing, this project, and when it had to be executed, it was pretty narrow window. So I just remember my phone rang and, can you handle this? And can you do it fast? And so sure, why not? My impression of the writing of it was that it was pretty fast. I don't remember agonizing over everything. I mean, I probably forgot stuff about this novel much, much more quickly and efficiently than I usually do. It didn't seem like there were a lot of, very fundamental revisions to it. It didn't seem like, it seems like when stuff got changed, it was just like, well, we can cut that. We have enough stories. We really don't need the Klingon Jimmy Kimmel show bit, and so that's not in there.
Is that for real? Are you?
Yeah.
You had like a Jimmy Kimmel Klingon type show?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
For reasons that are obvious now, that was a wise decision on Ed's part. But it wasn't like, I mean, there's so much stuff. There's so much varied material in there. Editing it had to be a lot different than, a traditional novel with one story and one through line and, one big climax that you're building toward. It just didn't seem to, it was more like an exercise in copy editing really than in, guiding every little idea in the project. So at least that's the way I remember it.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you really are trying to scope out this timeline that's been given to you. You're not really stepping on anybody's toes. You're not having to be consistent with other novels or anything else that's taking place at this time. And because each of these stories are really just interviews, it isn't this whole overarching story like you were saying. And Dan and I were talking the other day, it's like, how do we talk through this book? Because it's not like a traditional novel. We're not talking about this story with these same characters. You're getting different characters and different interviews throughout. So it does like chronicle the whole war effort. So I could see where you have a lot of free reign to write in this. But let me ask you this. Do you play, or did you ever play Star Trek Online?
I never actually played. I remember getting a copy of the game, a very early iteration of it. But my my relationship with computers is not that of the early adopter. Like right now, I'm in a sort of stone knives and bearskins period when I'm about to upgrade my infrastructure here, and then everything will be just cutting edge, and then it'll stay that way for all of 2 years, and then a few years down the road, it'll be, ancient Mesopotamian clay tablets again. And it seems to me I was probably at that time, I was in a pretty primitive computer situation. So I don't think I was actually able to play the game. Oh, that, and I think at the time there wasn't a version that would run on Mac. I don't know, maybe there still isn't.
That's right. I remember.
And I didn't have a PC.
Yes. I think it was quite a long time before they did a Mac version. I don't know. Maybe I think they eventually came out with a Mac. Maybe.
I'm pretty sure. I think so, but I
think it was quite some time later.
Yeah, in 2010. I think that was what they launched in 9 or 10. So,
well, I remember when this game came out, I had a computer, but it just wouldn't support it because it was too slow. My computer was too slow for it. But then I got a new job around this time, actually, in early 2010, and I got a laptop from work, and it worked really well, the computer itself. And I thought, I can play Star Trek Online on this. but they set it up where I couldn't download it. I didn't have the admin rights to download it. So it took me years and years later till I finally been able to get into it. And now I don't know what I'm doing. My ship just keeps flying around and I'm going nowhere and I don't know what to do.
Those sneaky IT guys.
Right.
Yes, life in Starfleet, just a metaphor for the real world.
Right.
In our warp nacelles.
But Dan, you've played it just a little too, right? I mean, not a lot.
Yeah, I played it for a couple years back when it first came out. And it's been ages now since I've played it. And I keep seeing like news of all these new stories coming out and they look really interesting, but I don't have the time lately. So, which is unfortunate. It looks really fun. So
I know.
Yeah. That period in my life too, I didn't really have a lot of time for stuff like that. And it just seems like once parenthood started in 1999, just everything has been just in this hyper accelerated Scalosian water sort of mode. And the first time things have really slowed down significantly really is this pandemic, so it's given me an opportunity to start to, go back to what I did in college, dust off my guitar playing skills and that kind of feels good.
that's awesome. Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, some of my favorite parts, there's certain things that have stood out to me because I read this book when it came out and there's certain things I remembered in it. And one thing in particular was the Department of Temporal Investigations, Loosely and Dolmer, the two agents.
Right. And of course that was before the Temporal Investigations novels
right.
came out. And so that was all, I mean, I realized at the time that like Christopher Bennett was not beholden to anything I set up there. And I tried to go out of my way to, with the Q character coming in and saying, oh, you limited humans in your conception of reality. It doesn't matter if all the continuity matches up, essentially, is what he says at some point in the book. So you can have different versions of their story, Luxley and Dolmer, or the return of Data, because that story does not play in there the same way it does in the overall novel continuity. And none of that stuff had happened yet, but I think that gave me some additional freedom too, because I think we all knew going in that this is its own little continuity corner. It doesn't matter if something that comes out next year or 6 months from now tells the same story but completely differently.
Right, right. Which is kind of touched in here with Dolmer because he's in the psychiatric care facility and he has memories of other timelines.
Right.
And that's the thing one of the things I remembered about this book, because at that time, and, spoiler alert for all the Voyager novels that came out around that time, but Janeway had died in the novels, but yet she's interviewed in this book. And I was like, oh, well, this is obviously like not matching up with that. But then Dolmer says he remembers a time when Janeway was dead. She wasn't even alive. There were certain things he was picking up even on Vulcan was destroyed.
Right.
And for some reason, Vulcan's still around.
There were parts of the timeline or the game timeline that were from the get-go were in conflict with the novel universe. And Janeway's death is an example of that. I mean, Janeway was her death didn't, as I recall, it didn't occur at all in their timeline, and they were just separate universes, I guess. I wanted to make some sort of a subtle, I hope it was subtle, a recognition of that fact through events in the story that lots of things are possible, and the timeline is. I might have used the metaphor in the book. The timeline is like a rug that's been yanked and pulled and unraveled and patched so many times that eventually you end up with a spot that you just can't fix. And so you say, F it, and put the couch on it so you can't see it, So that really freed me from a lot of constraints, I think.
it was fun to see kind of a wink and a nod at a lot of that stuff. Like that chapter to me really said to me, like, hey, you reader out there, don't worry about it. Like this is a story that takes place in this version of Star Trek. And, you know, Dulmer says something like, I don't understand how there could have been a battle in orbit of Vulcan when Vulcan was destroyed a century ago. And, you know, Jake and Luxley look at each other like, oh boy, this guy's nuts.
Yeah.
That's great.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a rare thing actually when you're completely let off the leash in terms of observing continuity, because we all really tried hard not to mess up each other's continuity. And there were plenty of times where there'd be whole groups of us kind of, just checking in with each other all the time, just regarding details of technology or, just how things work, so we're not contradicting each other. I remember doing a lot of that with the Mission Gamma books, but we did number 3. I think it was the third one, mm-hmm. 3 of 4. And there was a high degree of coordination.
Yeah, and there's still things in this book that tie to that novel timeline in the 24th century. I mean, we see that Picard and Beverly Crusher are together and they have their son Rene, which we've seen in the novels. That's acknowledged here. Nan Baco as being president, for example. I mean, there's and even Destiny is referred to in here. So it's not as if it ignores that timeline. And plus, this timeline really works with the Star Trek Countdown graphic novel that came out that was tied to Star Trek 09.
Right. And I think those comics are on the timeline, or at least as it was then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know to what degree they've ever had to, like purge it and do a Crisis on Infinite Earths and, completely revise it. But, yeah, at the time it was pretty simple and it was easy to see where things diverged. So I didn't lose any sleep over that.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciated one of my favorite parts was bringing in the appearance of Data in Countdown and kind of using his backstory and how they brought him back in the body of B4. And especially, I really enjoyed the kind of paying some respect to the moral and ethical implications of that. I was wondering, like, how did you find writing that kind of resurrection of Data?
Before, I wanted to show him as having some sort of maybe he doesn't have all of Data's talents, and he doesn't have his intelligence, and he doesn't have his analytical abilities, but he has a kind of nobility, and he knows what the right thing to do is in any situation, and he understands the concept of the needs of the many, and he took the needs of the many into account and stepped aside, even at the cost of his life, because there was one android body, and they couldn't both have it, and Data would not be ethically unable to take it from him, even if that was what was required to save the day. And of course, B4, having a similar ethical makeup, saw that, understood that, and then just kind of sort of threw himself on the grenade, as it were, and forced Data's hands. Like, you must take over this body, mm-hmm. because you're the only one.
Yeah, I did love that in the end it was his decision and it wasn't like a forcible.
It had to be.
Yeah.
It had to be. It would be like, I don't know. No, I would have found myself not liking Data very much.
Yeah. And Geordi as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Data's about to make this sacrifice, but B4 essentially learns from Data what he's doing and why he's doing. So Data is in a lot of ways a mentor to B4, and B4 takes what he's learned from Data and makes the sacrifice as opposed to Data doing it. I mean, it's like they're pretty much, very similar. In that respect,
they're the same guy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they share the same body, but they are kind of close to being the same guy. Yeah.
Cut from the same cloth. Yeah.
And then Bruce Maddox walked away from, he was working on this, and then he walked away from this whole project. I
like the way Bruce Maddox's relationship with Data evolved in the series. I mean, he started off as, I guess you'd have to say, a villain. I mean, he was like a nemesis. He was like, I'm here to vivisect you. And then later that deepened into a kind of a colleague relationship. And then I think they became friends. And so I wanted to maintain that and, keep that on that level. I didn't want to portray him as some sort of bad guy.
So have you been watching Star Trek Picard? Did you see the first season?
No, I have not yet. I am woefully behind in all this stuff. Yeah, I have the episodes. I just haven't, just way behind in all my media stuff.
Yeah. Because there's some parallels in here. It was kind of fun reading these and thinking, oh, well, this is a little different from what we saw in Picard or even in the current 24th century novel timeline. But then there's some parallels in there too. Like, so you can see how certain things relate between the series and the novel timelines and what we see here and online. And I like how it also connects to the Countdown comic, because we also see an interview with General Worf in here, and he's talking, he's being praised for saving Vulcan. And Justin Ozer, a friend of the show, reached out to us and he's like, did I miss something? When did Worf save Vulcan? And it was like, I had to say, oh, it was in the Countdown comic.
Yeah. There were a lot of little Easter eggs like that just number those amongst the many, many things I've forgotten. The other thing is significant about the book. I think it might be the only Star Trek novel, certainly the only one of mine, that is footnotes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I really appreciated those. Yeah.
I remember there being a bunch of statistics I had to cite in the baseball story and the Gorns of Summer.
That's excellent. Actually, that's funny. That's what I was going to bring up next, was the whole baseball match between the Pike City Pioneers and the Gorn team on Cestus 3. What was that like, writing that kind of epic battle between these two groups and kind of reconciling the different versions of Gorn we've gotten over the years as well? I thought that was kind of clever.
Well, I got to have a little fun with the Gorn a few years later, on another year or two later, on one of the Titan books.
Seize the Fire, I believe, right? Was that one? Yeah,
and it's always been my belief about the Gorn that they had to have been divided up into castes of some kind of specialties, because one of the things that we saw them do or heard them do all the way back in Arena was they were imitating human voices and sending false messages. And they sent a message to Captain Kirk about, beam down to our starbase and we'll serve you dinner. And so it's like there's some Gorn actor mimicking these people. Well, obviously the one and only Gorn we saw in that episode, Earthling, didn't have any, that was not his specialty. So I just thought I wanted to have some fun with the idea that they're split into multiple castes. We don't know that, really. We're woefully ignorant of their culture. And we have a baseball game with them, and we think it's going to be a bunch of like guys in Godzilla suits, lumbering around the diamond. Instead, it's velociraptors from Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I like how you say, you mentioned how some of these Gorn move really slow.
Yeah.
Yeah, now you really have me wanting to meet the Gorn Sir Laurence Olivier.
Well, the idea of playing a baseball game against the Gorn is something I've wanted to do since Andy and I were doing scripts at Marvel. That only went on for two and a half years, something like that. So, or not even that. Yeah, because it was mid 1996 when they bought the Tribble story, and no, 2.5 years later, they marched us all out into the snow and shot us. It was around Christmas time. They just canceled all the Trek books. Very sad.
Oh man!
But yeah, that's something I would have if Tim or Bobby or somebody had let me get away with the baseball thing. That would have happened at Marvel.
I would love to see this in comic form like that. I never thought of that. That's incredible.
Having read this book way back then, And then when I got to this part, I was like, oh my gosh, I remember this now. And it's like, to me, almost like the craziest part of this book. It's just picturing them all playing baseball together, you know? I mean, that's almost up there with your whole Jimmy Kimmel Klingon show, you know?
Yeah.
But it's a fun idea. And, you know, you can take it seriously because it's just another way that they're trying to find a way to settle their differences. But then we find out the pitcher of the Gorn is an Undine infiltrator. And so that gets back to this whole thing of them taking human form and other species forms, and you can't detect them because of their DNA. They can change the DNA to fit.
Right. So what could be more appropriate in a time of war? You know, paranoia, justified paranoia, but still paranoia. And that's always going to lead you into some precarious places. And plus, I always love the fact that DS9, but actually starting with TNG, acknowledged that baseball was a thing, and that, you know, somehow human society just grew out of baseball or something. I just thought that was so sad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just no longer have time for it. But then by the 24th century, there's like a real effort to bring it back, and it's like watching troops of actors doing Shakespeare in the Park or something. And we're going to keep this alive. I don't know, watching my kids grow up not appreciating baseball and then soccer appearing everywhere. You know, come on, give me my baseball.
Well, and it's cool too, because the interviews with Cassidy Yates, I kept waiting to see if anything was going to mention about where Ben Sisko is at this time. And we didn't get that. But of course, you probably couldn't go there.
Well, yeah. And also I had to take the stories where they wanted to go naturally. So, you know, there are any number of facts that you could footnote and present as Easter eggs that are really not germane to anything that they're talking about in the story. Try to avoid, you know, shoehorning in facts just because it could. Just, you know, want to keep the momentum going, and those things, too many of those things just bring everything to a dead halt.
Yeah, I can see where that would be. There'd be a temptation to kind of get into those things, like, since you're given such free reign. But yeah, that would be for me, a tough temptation to resist.
I liked having Easter eggs that were not necessarily Star Trek Easter eggs too. You know, stuff about making baseball bats and what kind of genetically engineered trees they had to grow on Cestus 3 so they can make baseball bats.
Yeah, I love those little details. I thought that was really, it really builds out that Star Trek future world too. Yeah,
you guys have really stoked a lot of memories on this too. I should have flipped through it, I guess, before them in here.
I made a lot of notes for this round. I'm not used to making notes back then when I was reading, but now this time I made notes of all, like there was an interview with 7 of 9. We got that one with Quark, Vic Fontaine. That was pretty cool too.
Yeah, Vic Fontaine has always been one of my favorite characters. I love Vic Fontaine. I don't know what it is. It's just such a keen observer of the human condition.
Yeah, he's a very unique individual as well, and just kind of focusing specifically on him in this book, I really appreciated how well you illustrated like the idea of him being stuck in that particular time, but at the same time still having kind of knowledge of where it's all going, but still kind of tied to that time and place.
Right.
It felt like a little existential almost.
Avoiding falling into this, you know, kind of nihilism. I mean, there was an episode of Rick and Morty with there was some household appliance on the table, and its job was to pass the butter.
The little robot. Yeah.
Why am I here? You're here to pass the butter. Oh my God. That could have happened to Vic.
That's amazing. I love it.
I mean, imagine, you know, it's always going to be 1962, and you can never plan ahead for the tax refund you're going to get in April, because it's going to be April of the same year. It's Vic is just positively focused and outward directed, and just thinking about other people and how they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's all anybody can ever do to keep the depression at bay.
And kind of like his genuine surprise at the idea of holographic beings' rights. I thought that was interesting parallel to what was happening in the US at that time, or would be happening in a few years, really.
That's always been the biggest thing Star Trek has to my mind has been selling us, as a culture, is that there's room for improvement in the human condition, and maybe the human condition is somehow perfectible, even in a world with phasers and transporters and antimatter engines. That's a hell of a far-fetched concept, but it's really baked into Star Trek. And so it's kind of encouraging to see, even at that point in the overall continuity of Star Trek, seeing, one of the last of our unconscious prejudices, playing out. So, they're only holograms. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean only holograms? They're sentient beings. They have rights. Obviously through the end of Voyager, they hadn't come anywhere near resolving that, because, you see that shot of 1,000 Dr. Zimmermans, shoveling out the coal bin or whatever, working in a mine. Yeah, I guess it's a task that's never done.
Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, this interview with Vic is interesting for the reasons we're mentioning, but this also could have applied to the Doctor. And since the Doctor would have had experience with species 8472 being on Voyager, I'm kind of surprised you didn't go the direction of the Doctor, but I'm assuming it's because you're just wanting to write Vic Fontaine for this.
Well, yeah, you don't want to have a bunch of superfluous, duplication. I don't remember agonizing over that particular detail. It's like, oh no, we already have a hologram story. I think certainly the dealing with Vic and his take on existence that scratched that particular itch. I think it probably wasn't any real reason to, gild the lily. And I mean, the book was pretty full. It was pretty cram full. I don't feel like looking back on it, I don't have any problems with anything that got cut. I don't feel like it was particularly lacking anything I wanted to do. And I'm sure I overlooked a lot of stuff, that I could have done. But I figured, well, we've got a really quick turnaround project here and only a few weeks to execute it. As long as I feel sort of satisfied by the outcome, I can live with it.
Well, I like it because I don't feel like there's anything missing. I didn't feel like you missed any opportunities. I really enjoy this book because, number one, even though I'm not playing Star Trek Online, it's a different take on this continuity that I really appreciate. And then number two, the Undine, that whole situation in a war, it makes so much total sense that the Federation and that part of the galaxy would have to deal with this species based on what relationship they had with the Borg, and especially with Janeway helping the Borg against species 8472. They would feel threatened by the Federation.
And the sort of social pathologies that the Undine touched off amongst humans.
There is a definite, you were talking about like the pathologies among humans and other species and stuff. The book really is filled with this kind of paranoia, and as you get into it, it goes much deeper than you expect even. And I think this was really brought home for me with the interview with Worf, where by the end of the interview, he doesn't seem sure if he's actually Worf or an Undine infiltrator, which is really unsettling, really unnerving. And it just sets you on edge for the whole book, and it works really well.
Well, I mean, I hope it's able to achieve that, because now we have we have QAnon, so we can be off balance and gaslit all the time.
Joy.
So I mean, just think like none of that stuff existed in the world, not yet. Or not to the point where it is now, where swaths of humanity are going insane and trying to take over the Capitol building. It comes from the same kind of weird fears and paranoia and delusions. So I wanted I did want the Undine to kind of have a little bit of that monster under the bed kind of vibe. You're never sure.
Yeah, because throughout the novel, some people make the assumption the war is over, but it's always being pointed out, is it really? Could they come back? I mean, the fear is always there. It's not over. And I really, that point about Worf that you mentioned, Dan, reminded me of the interview with Dr. Jack, the genetically enhanced engineer from DS9.
Right. For the Jack Pack.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. When he was talking about one of the best ways to win the war is to just allow the Undine to win and just replace us all. And there'd be another Dan, Bruce, and Michael with the same DNA and I mean, just replacing us, and our lives would continue, but it's not us. It's somebody else representing us.
Yeah. That brings to mind, Stephen Wright doing that joke about how somebody broke into my apartment and replaced all the furniture with exact duplicates.
Yes.
We wouldn't know. And it brings to mind the ending of the 1978 remake of The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Because like it or not, that's what happened. Everybody got replaced. And then I'm sure they just kept right on going to work and doing all the same stuff they did before they got replaced. So, that's a grim thought.
It's a really similar argument to another novel we recently read, Spock Must Die, the old Bantam novel.
Oh, yeah. A difference that makes no difference is no difference.
Exactly. That's the exact line that's repeated in that book, too. That's great.
Wow. That was only 51 years ago. Yikes. I still remember that. I can't remember the shit I wrote 10 years ago, but I remember what James Fish wrote half a century ago. Well, that shows who's more memorable.
No, Dan and I were talking about this the other day. I think that when we are exposed to something at a younger age, we remember it better than we do if we're exposed to something later in our lives.
Oh, sure. I remember being blown away by that idea of, if I'm remembering it right, the chirality of the molecules being reversed. So you had Spock and like right-handed Spock and left-handed Spock.
Yeah.
And the one with the reverse chirality, couldn't, he would starve to death eating our food because the molecules don't hook up correctly.
Right.
And, just wow. There were a few times in the actual course of Star Trek where I felt, kind of mind blown like that. That's definitely one of the places.
Yeah. When we reread that book, because I had read it years ago, but I was surprised how much I really enjoyed it. I thought that was a really good one.
I think it justified my own misgivings about the transporter. I still can't. Maybe this is why, as in my advanced ripe old age, Leonard McCoy is my favorite TOS character because he rightly distrusts all this stuff. You think about it, you can't trust a coworker to change the toner cartridge in the office copier, or put a new coffee filter in the machine. Is like, I'm going to let you disintegrate me into basic waves and rematerialize me somewhere else. I have some doubts about that.
I always think about that when I watch Star Trek The Motion Picture, when they have the transporter accident. And then after that, McCoy beams in. I'm like, did they tell him there was an accident? Because if he'd known there was an accident right before he beamed him, he'd probably say, no way, no. Just take me in a shuttle pod to the Enterprise.
Yeah. No, that to me, the fact that he consented tells me he was beaming in from, wherever it was he was living in the deep South, but I think he was a Georgia boy, so he was living in he's probably living in Atlanta.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I just passed him the other day walking down the street. So yeah, in the movie he does grumble about using the transporter, but he still did it. But yeah, I don't think I would.
Yeah, but he couldn't resist touching himself just to make sure.
Making sure all the chest hairs are still there.
Yeah, now I kind of want to go back and check out Star Trek Online and see what.
Right.
So now,
Me
unlike
too.
then, I've got one of my kids is really super into video games. He probably could recite me chapter and verse on it right now.
Yeah, that's actually one thing this book did was kind of make me want to go check out Star Trek Online again after all these years.
And that was another success criteria, I would say, because I mean, from a marketing perspective, when you're going to create a crossover like that, you want to draw the audiences in the same direction, cross them over. I don't know to what extent that succeeded. I don't know if anybody was really measuring that. I don't know if it ever sold out. So I don't think it ever had more than the one printing. So I guess I can infer from that that's like the great majority of mid-list paperbacks. They just accumulate in warehouses. Every once in a while, they send the authors a note saying, you can buy some cheap right now, but they're on their way to the pulping machine. So you better, act now while supplies last.
It's really too bad because, and I mean, like I picked this up when it first was published back in 2010, but I have to admit it sat on the shelf since then. And this is the first time that I've read it. And reading it now, I really regret not cracking it open back then because it's definitely very unique in the Star Trek novel line. And like I said, I played Star Trek Online. I think it would have been a lot of fun to kind of have that companion piece.
There aren't a lot of examples in Star Trek literature of like oral histories and stuff like that. I mean, there's some travelogue stuff, where the audience is being addressed directly in the second person, and a couple of like Fodor's guides to, traveling in the Klingon Empire or whatever. So there is a little bit of that, but this one might stand alone as like the only real, oral history where you're being given a historical narrative, in the way you would from any historian. So I'm kind of proud of that. They don't get too many opportunities to do stuff like that.
I think the way you approach this book was very clever. I haven't read that many books that are based on video games, but I've heard of some and I've read a few. And it's usually the story that you see in the video game. And this isn't the story. I mean, because some people say it doesn't work as well as a book because it sounds like I'm reading a game, but that's not what this is. I mean, this is a good read, whether you're into Star Trek Online or not, but it's not telling that story. It's a story within the story.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole concept of a Star Trek universe, the shared universe, whether it's in books or comics or in video games, it's a basket that contains, many, multitudes of stories. So they just kind of let me go wild with that because all you really needed was a theme to unite everything, the war. And then, you could tell any number of stories. That freed me of the obligation of having to micromanage a complex, detailed continuity or hew to a whole bunch of story beats like you would in some action video game where you're fighting zombies in Raccoon City or something, and you're actually adapting a story of the game into a novel. That just really wasn't like an adaptation like that at all. It didn't feel like that kind of job. It just felt like, I can just write whatever I want.
Well, is there anything that we've kind of not brought up that you wanted to talk about with regards to this book that we haven't mentioned yet?
Well, you guys remembered it much better than I did.
We also just recently read it. So
yeah. Very unfair advantage over here.
Yeah. I don't remember having any real agenda, other than I wanted the Jake Sisko thing to feel authentic. I wanted the characters' voices to be audible. You could hear Cassidy Yates speaking to you in your head. Only you guys out there know, to what extent I succeeded, but that was the goal.
Yeah, to my ear, like reading it that really worked, and especially given the format that it was like a one-on-one interview, it really let you kind of sit across from those characters, and the voices I thought worked really well. A couple in particular, I remember thinking Janeway sounded very Janeway-esque, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Which, such a distinct, unique voice. It's great to capture that, and other characters as well. I remember.
I think Katharine Hepburn.
Absolutely.
Writing Janeway, I think Katharine Hepburn.
I thought Garrick was good too.
Yeah.
Well, Garrick is fun. Well, the characters who are sort of pranksters at heart are a lot of fun. Q is a lot of fun.
I also like appreciated a lot of the little quirks that were put in that like Jake noticed and kind of commented on as a postscript. So one that jumped out to me was both 7 of 9 and Janeway referring to them as species 8472 and never once saying the Undine, and Jake kind of making note of that and thinking like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I like those little touches.
Yeah. Wow. Another detail, yet another detail I've forgotten.
Yeah. Michael, you need to go back and reread this. I think you'd really appreciate what you did here.
Well, I would hope so.
Well, speaking of, I mean, we really enjoyed the book, but what are you doing lately? Are you writing anything new?
I don't have any Star Trek stuff in the hopper at the moment. Kind of taking a little bit of sabbatical, but I am working on a original fiction piece, and all I'll really say about it is kind of a murder mystery, but imagine it's like 50% LA Confidential and 50% Yellow Submarine.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, just imagine a series of horrible crimes in Pepperland.
Great. Well, if people want to follow you online, where can they find you?
Well, I'm on Facebook, pretty easy to find. I don't maintain a website as such. Yeah, look me up. It's a name that's common as dirt, Michael Martin, but should be pretty evident from the stuff I posted, who it is.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this book. And like I said, I know it's been over a decade, and I really appreciate you being able to kind of share what you remember with us.
Well, I'm happy to have the opportunity. It's been a kind of a fun stroll down memory lane.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And again, I really enjoyed reading the book again. And yeah, you don't have to play Star Trek Online to enjoy this. This is a Star Trek novel. It's something people should read, especially now when we've got these different continuities going on and see the different parallels between the two.
And now that we're all trapped in our respective bunkers.
Exactly. What else are you going to do, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then if anybody reads this book recently, then quiz Michael on some of the things in here and see if he gets it right, if he remembers everything. That should be fun. So, Dan, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Kertrats. That's Kertrats. I'm also on youtube.com/Kertrats Productions. And on Facebook, I'm always hanging out in the Positively Trek discussion group, our listeners group on Facebook.
Yeah. Hey, we are also on Patreon, so you can support the podcast on Patreon. Look for Positively Trek on there, become a patron, and we have certain perks at different levels, so check that out on the site there. I'm on Twitter at Admiral_Rex, and you can find me occasionally also on the Star Wars Report podcast. So thanks, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Michael, for joining us. And everybody, just remember what we always say here at the end of every show: stay positive.